It feels like today is going to be a little bit of a mix of optimists and skeptics, right? So it's the classic, is the glass half empty, is the glass half full? Information security professionals traditionally have a reputation, well-deserved I might add, for being the glass half empty is kind of people, right? And one of the things that I've always sort of prided myself on is being a little bit different from that, in that you do have to look at the power and the capabilities of new technologies that are out there and all the things that can bring you, but we're also conditioned to look for everything that can go wrong, right? So I'm not a glass half empty, glass half full. I guess I'm kind of the glass is just too big kind of person, right? It's a fascinating time to be working in information security. I've been doing this for 22 years now, and I've never seen anything like the last 12 to 18 months, both in terms of the pace and sophistication that attacks have hit both corporate America and individuals, but also, frankly, the amount of awareness and media coverage of this kind of thing. You have the President of the United States making speeches about this, you have Congress, you have trade wars with China really coming around information security. So the question is, what's happened over the last year or so that's caused all this fervor? And what I start with is, you think about we're conditioned to think about what are the threats that we face and who are the kind of people that are coming after us, right? And if I think about large corporations, at least in the financial industry, we've always thought about three types of threats that face us. Number one is basically disruption of commerce. And what we usually think about here are people we call hacktivists, people that either hate big business or hate America or just don't like individual companies that tend to do things like denial of service attacks or website defacement, really more of a nuisance kind of a thing. We think about WikiLeaks, we think about Anonymous, we think about Occupy Wall Street, that sort of thing. And that's one group. The second group tends to be people that are much more focused on stealing money, right? This is identity theft. This is fraud. This is a very serious problem, but it's one we know how to deal with, and frankly, banks will always make customers whole for this kind of thing. But traditionally, this has been the province of organized crime, of the Eastern European nations, etc. About 5 years ago, we saw a significant increase in what we call nation-state-sponsored cyber attacks, right? People that were really focused on stealing intellectual property. What's the latest chip design from Intel? What's the new fighter plane design that Lockheed is working on, etc. Most commonly, and very quickly in the news, all of those conversations very quickly turn to China, right? And the challenge behind that is not so much specific to China or anything, but what happens when you put the entire resources of a nation state behind those kind of attacks, and what can they do? And you see all kinds of corporate espionage going on between different countries to favor bids on companies from different for mining rights or M&A deals or any of that kind of stuff. Now, the challenge we've seen over the last year is really a coupling of that first group and that third group. And I want to point to two specific instances that have happened over the last year. Number one, actually a year and a week ago, not that anybody's counting, you saw a very huge spate of denial of service attacks hit the financial industry. You would have read about in the press and other things like that. Websites are down and people can't get to things and that sort of thing. And what we saw is denial of service attacks hit the industry all the time, hundreds of them a year, et cetera. So what's different? The sophistication of these attacks was somewhere between 10 and 100 times greater than anything we'd ever seen before. And we said, hey, this doesn't feel like the average sort of hacker who hates America and that kind of stuff coming after us. That's fact one. Fact two is there were a number of attacks last year, most notably an attack against Saudi Aramco, a national oil company in Saudi Arabia. It was a simple virus sort of thing. So a virus infects the computers at the oil company. And the way viruses usually work is they're designed to implant a backdoor or frankly, steal information and get it out of the firm or any kind of thing. This virus, called the Shamoon virus, existed for the sole purpose of destroying the boot sector of a computer. That's just mean, right? So if you think about it, one day you wake up and 30,000 computers are turned into bricks. So what happens, and if you chart both of those attacks that I just mentioned there, they all chart back to a different set of nation states that have a different motivation behind what they do. So what you see is this migration from disruption to destruction, right? Now, if I interrupt a website let's say it's a banking website. Okay, so the banking website is down. You know what? The ATMs still work. Mobile banking still works. The branches are still there. Plenty of different ways to get your money. What happens now if that's a funds transfer system? What happens if now it's one of the major interchange networks, right? The kind of things that we worry about going forward are much more drastic and much more catastrophic to the industry. So when we think about what's changed over the last year, a couple things that come to mind. Number one is an increase in the pace, sophistication, complexity, and impact of these attacks. Number two is a change in the motivation, right? We never worried about terrorists getting involved in cyber attacks, just frankly wasn't their style, right? Until about a year ago, right? So the motivations are moving from inconvenience to theft and espionage, now outright destruction of technology. And the third point is, frankly, we've gotten pretty good over the last 15, 20 years at protecting computer systems, self-healing operating systems, better secure code design, etc. Well, if the better we get at building computers and securing computers, why should I bother hacking into that system if I can just compromise this person and convince them to give up their password? So you've seen the rise of spear phishing and really targeted phishing attacks at individuals being the source of this. So how does this work? Well, if I look at the nature of these kind of attacks and the way they work today, you get an email. You get an email. You've all gotten an email before. I am the son of a former Nigerian dictator, such and such. And you'd be amazed at the number of people that will click on anything that you put in front of them, right? Click here to get hacked. Ooh, that sounds cool. And there you go. So basically, you have a targeted message, and these targeted messages have gone a long way from the I am the son of the former Nigerian dictator. Now you get things with an actual logo of a firm with your information. Hey, here's your account. Your account's been compromised. Click here to reset your password. For the love of God, don't click on things that say, click here and we'll give you money, or click here and we'll do other things like that. No reputable company is ever going to send you something like that. If they do, they have a different problem. So that's the first thing. What does that do? It infects your local system. It installs a piece of malware, looks for some level of privilege, administrator rights on a system, your ability to access an individual application, et cetera, and then moves laterally from there. In large corporations, the idea is, I can't compromise the end server, I'll compromise the individual who has access to everything, and I'll just go laterally from there, get the information out of that system, collect as much data as I can, sit, lie dormant, monitor activity, and then look to exfiltrate the data and get it out of the firm when nobody's looking, right? So what's interesting is we spent a lot of time over the last decade or so trying to protect the firm from bad outsiders trying to get it. We've gotten very good at that. Then we realized, hey, we all work for very large companies. A lot of people work here. You kind of have to worry about the bad insider as well. The Aramco attack is a good example. They had inside help. Now the problem is, with this kind of an attack, you have to worry about, is that a niche, or is that somebody pretending to be a niche? Now I got to worry about the bad outsider who's compromised the good insider, who looks like the good insider but is actually a bad outsider, and like my head's going to explode, right? So how do you do that? And what's interesting about this is if you look at all the major attacks that have been in the news over the last year, well, I'm going back to the Operation Aurora attack, which was at Google and McAfee about 4 years ago, or the Aramco attack I mentioned, or one that actually caused a lot of people to sit up straight. There was an attack against RSA, a big security company, a number of years ago, 2 years ago. And it turns out the attackers weren't targeting RSA. RSA makes security tokens. They were trying to break into defense contractors, couldn't break in because the security tokens they use. So let's just break into the security company, get the tokens, and use those to break into the defense contractors. Again, your head's going to explode. So you worry about the supply chain and all of the extensions of firms and what we do around that. Now, when we look at emerging technologies, that idea of the extended enterprise or the adoption of the cloud, this is a slide we generally talk about as the we now live in the era of cloud, mobile, data, social. It's all anybody wants to talk about. Every talk you go to is going to have one of those 4 words. At least so far they have, right? So when you think about the cloud and you extend the environment, it's an incredibly powerful capability. Whether it be iCloud, lose your phone, get a new phone, all your data is back right away. Great. But from an enterprise point of view, from a corporate point of view, the challenge you get for people that are in my role is how do you control data when you don't control the data, right? Every large bank in the US is required by law to notify customers if there's been a breach of their data. And what every major firm will tell you is 99 times out of 100, when that's happened, it's not because the bank has been compromised, it's because one of the suppliers has been compromised. Now, it doesn't matter, it's the bank's fault. We went through all that kind of stuff. But it really does cause you to stop and think before you do adopt a lot of those things. How do you protect things that you don't protect, that you don't control, right? Mobile. There's a meme that makes the rounds around Facebook about every 6 months that you may have seen. It says, if somebody from the 1950s were transported to today, what would be the hardest thing for them to understand? And basically says, I hold in my pocket a device that's capable of harnessing the entirety of information ever known to mankind. And I use it to share pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. Having said that, right, think about mobile commerce. Think about life before smartphones. This is really only about 5 years old, right? How did we possibly live before that, right? What you do have to worry about is, what's running on this? And when you're looking at, on the other side of receiving end of commerce, has the device been jailbroken? Has it been compromised, right? I will tell you, we are no different from any other firm out there, have pulled multiple dozens of fake banking applications off the Android market, right? Look exactly like, have all the logos, look exactly like a banking app, have nothing to do with the bank, right? How do you do that? How do you apply the same sort of controls that you do internally within a firm to things that come out there? Now, the flip side to that is, for all the noise about mobile being the next big security problem, this is an incredibly powerful device. How about we harness it for security? Think about it. I did take with note Dave's crack about the IBM password policy, and I know a person who has my job at IBM, and I'll speak to her later about that. But regardless, why do I need a password? I have a device here. It's got a microphone. It's got a GPS. It's got a camera. It's got a fingerprint reader, right? This is where authentication is going to head. You walk in, it notices the presence of your phone. You authenticate with it. We do it already. We use it for password resets. I speak my voice into the phone. It registers, resets my password automatically. Think about walking up to an ATM machine with a phone in your pocket. It senses the presence. All of a sudden, you don't need a PIN code anymore. That coupled with some sort of biometric, right? Very powerful capability there as well. Big data is something you'll, again, hear a lot about. And it's amazing in the age of big data that half of the Groupons I get still seem to be for things like bikini waxes and pole dancing. So I like to tell myself that's a big data problem, but maybe they are profiling better than I think they are. But regardless, it does offer tremendous power, for any organization that wants to provide very targeted, focused messaging to their customers. The flip side is, as an individual, do I want all that data in one place? Do I want all that data about my entire life in one place? There's a little bit of concentration risk. It's just one place for people to go after, right? And frankly, there's a fine line between targeted and just creepy, right? Do I want companies to know that much about me, right? And this gets to that fine line we always run into between security and privacy. Having said that, we do use data in security, and I'll close on this here as we go forward, is we have incredible capabilities to use this for security purposes. I was talking to a colleague from another firm who says, we know somebody's going to leave the firm 2 weeks before they actually quit. I said, well, that's pretty cool. How do you do that? Well, it's simple. They update the resume. They go update all their benefits. They send all their email home. They send all the documents they're working on, et cetera. So then we use that and say, okay, that's great. I went back to our guys and said, how will we do that? I said, well, let's look for people sending a whole bunch of stuff home. How exactly do you look for a whole bunch of stuff, right? So what we've been able to do is create profiles for individuals and say, okay, a whole bunch of stuff for you is different for you, it's different for you, but if you differ from your own general pattern by more than 4 standard deviations, maybe that's worth looking into. And the final thing I'll say is, looking at a lot of the trends out there, there's a common theme you're going to see up here, right? When everything's connected, we can get much more intelligence, but when everybody knows everything about you, privacy's kind of dead. When you think about autonomous computing, great, incredibly powerful capability until the first self-driving car gets hacked or Skynet takes over. Take your pick on which way you look at that, right? Oh, and by the way, I think privacy's kind of dead, right? Google Glass, another great example. Tremendously powerful. Overlay, the whole Erasmus thing is incredibly powerful. Until you realize anybody, anywhere, has access to anything in the environment, in that case, privacy gets kind of dead, right? And it's this challenge we always have of how much security do you want and how much privacy do you want? Everyone wants privacy until there's some sort of security issue, and then everyone wants security until there's some sort of privacy issue, and that's the thing we go back and forth, right? So we do talk excessively about an arms race here. There's two arms races I'll talk about. Number one is the trade-off between are the hackers getting better or are the defenders getting better? I like to think we're winning that one, although there are days when I'm not so sure. And secondly is, how do we strike that line between security and privacy, right? But again, in that sort of glass is half full sort of thing. On this one, I am glass half full. As an individual, I very much want my privacy. As a corporate executive, I really do want a lot of security in that space. But it's an evolving effort, and again, like I said, I like to think we're winning this one. Thanks very much.